In this video, we're talking to the winner of the April Brewers Cup Philippines, Bene Sanchez. Welcome, my name is Patrick Rolfe and this is Coffee with April. For this episode, we're sitting down with Bene Sanchez, the winner of the first ever April Brewers Cup. That was the Manila edition. And we're talking about how did he brew the coffee? How did they brew the winning coffee? What is his general kind of brewing approach and recipe with the April Brewers? We're talking about the overall coffee competition or his experience at the April Brewers Cup. And we're also discussing what is coming up next because he will be competing in the National Filipino Brewers Cup later this year as well. So the video is basically divided into two parts. One, we're going to move over to just Ben doing his thing, doing his brewing and sharing that recipe. And after that, we're going to just sit down with him and talk a little bit about that recipe specifically, but also his experience about the April Brewers Cup. So we hope you enjoy this video as much as we do, and thank you for watching.
Hi, my name is Ben, and welcome to my house. Today I'll be showing you how I brewed in the April Brewers Cup Manila that won first place. It's also the way that I brew coffee at home. So we're going to be using the April dripper with the April filter. I really like this combination. I think it really makes great coffee. I have 15 grams of this pink bourbon. It's a washed coffee from Ethicus Roasters in Japan. So the recipe is really simple and anyone can do it. We're using 94 degrees of water. And we'll be pouring 60 ml in 4 equal pours so that we reach 240 ml. So we're going for a pretty gentle flow rate, something like 6 ml per second. We're also turning off the heating element. I find that having the temperature of the kettle decline really helps with the aftertaste of the coffee. So we're letting this brew for maybe 40 seconds between each pour. Okay. So the reason why we're doing multiple pours is because, well, that's what makes sense to me. Having a lower bed of water, because you're pouring it in multiple pours, will mean that you're going to have lesser bypass. So you're going to get a tastier coffee. And the other reason is when we pour, each time we're adding fresh solvent to give more power to the extraction, or more power for the water to extract the coffee. Yep. So you're going to be wanting a brew time of about 3 minutes to 3 minutes 30 seconds. That's the window of this brew. We're at 770 microns, so on the medium to medium coarse side. And that will allow us to make sure that even with a slightly longer brew time, we're not going to get too much bitter flavors. The goal is a very tasty and balanced cup of coffee with lots of sweetness, with a good amount of acidity, and with good flavor separation. It smells really good in here. So let me just choose a cup. Yeah. We will use the pink cup because this is a pink bourbon. And the brew time is looking pretty good. We're maybe 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Yeah. 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Okay. It smells great. So this is the coffee, or the way that I brewed coffee in the April Brewers Cup. And also the way that I brew at home. Cheers.
So, hi Ben, good to meet you again after the April Brewers Cup in Manila. Let's just start off with you sharing a little bit of what have you been up to? Have you brewed any good coffee recently?
Yeah, I've been trying to practice a lot. I've been trying to brew coffee for as much people as I can. So I've been like saying yes to like coffee shops that are asking if I could brew for their brew bar. And recently, it was the summer camp of this youth thing that I'm a part of, and I just brought all my coffee stuff and I just set it all up, and then I just did the 2 pours, brewed as much as I could, and that's what I've been up to lately.
That's awesome. Then you've been busy, which is how it should be. It's I think we should state for the record that so one of the interesting things here is that you are going up in the national Brewers Cup in the Philippines, right? Which for me is really exciting because it's really what the April Brewers Cup is kind of all about. It's about preparing you, giving you insight, giving you a bit of understanding for that format, right? And I think one thing you mentioned just a bit briefly before we started the recording is that, which I actually didn't know, but you before the competition in the April Brewers Cup, you literally almost never brewed 3 coffees at the same time, right? Like the day before, which is quite exciting, right? So could you tell us a little bit about how that was, like walking up on stage, basically brewing 3 cups of coffee at the first time?
That was the thing that stressed me out the most. Like I knew that I didn't have as much practice in brewing 3 cups at the same time. I knew that I could brew a decent cup of coffee. Uh, I actually worked as a barista for 2 years in a coffee shop that only did pour overs, which was weird, and obviously that's why it didn't last. But then the pandemic came, stuff. I just brewed coffee at home, and my friend Gio messaged me about the April Brewers Cup. So that was kind of like you could say I've been having sort of like a coffee hiatus. I've just been enjoying going to coffee shops and brewing coffee at home. Um, Never really planned to join a competition. Wasn't really in because the obviously doing something like nationals is very uh, time consuming, and lots of commitment. And then AeroPress is kind of just fun. So
Yeah.
when April Brewers, when she was telling me about April Brewers, I was like, oh, that actually sounds interesting. Somewhere in the middle, right? So
For sure.
but
That's
yeah.
Go for it.
So it definitely was nervous, or nerve wracking, because I have no competition experience before. But yeah, it was something that I wanted to see if it was something I could do, and
Mm.
pretty happy that I
Clear,
got to experience it.
clearly you could, right? Because since you came out as the winner, right? And I think it's what I think one of the things for me that I thought was very impressive, because on stage that you were clearly nervous in the sense that, let's say, your hands were shaking a little bit, but then the way you came across in what you were saying and how you were saying it was so natural, right? So I remember not feeling that, it was a bit weird because we could see on your hands that you were a bit nervous, but then when you were talking and with your eye contact and again, how you were describing your brew, you came across as someone that really knew what they were doing, which is then quite exciting given that you're never brewed 3 cups at the same time before, right? Which is a very big difference, right? It is considerably easier to brew one than brewing 3, right? Did you, like, something I consider myself when I'm competing? Did you ever have to change, let's say, the recipe from a singular brew to those three brews in any shape or form? Yeah.
Yeah, so I quickly found out that doing 30 seconds per, like having 30 seconds in between each pour was kind of challenging. It made me try to do a 3 pour version of the recipe, but it wasn't tasting as good for me. So I just extended it to 45 seconds so that I just had enough time to go across. And the results were pretty similar, so I was okay with it.
I think it's a very interesting thing because I think people that are not competing, I think often to some degree wrongly mistakes that the recipe we use when we brew 3 cups of coffee as like maybe the best recipe. But I like to argue quite often that give me the chance to just brew 1 cup of coffee and that's going to taste much better because you don't have to factor in things like it's difficult to pour in certain ways. You need to again think about the timing because you have to be consistent, right? So it's funny. Also in the World Brewers Cup, right? And, love the format, and of course, it's we should brew more coffees because that's our job as baristas, right? And we want to serve it to many people. But it's really interesting that maybe the best recipe is actually never on that stage because all the recipes are adapted to brewing 3 coffees, right? Within the 10 minutes, right? So something that we there's restraint with all kind of competitions, which I appreciate because I believe it makes us better as well, right? But it's something that you don't really understand until you're in there. But let's look a little bit closer at your at the kind of brewing that we just saw in the video here before us, right? And there's a few things here that I think is really interesting, and I kind of want to poke a little bit on and hear your thoughts on. I think the one thing is that we do have in common when we brew is that we seem to both like to do equal pours, so equal amount of water in each pour, which I think with April Brewers makes so much sense. I think that's when we get the best balance and the best kind of cleanliness. You're doing 60, 60, 60, 60. For how much coffee were you using there in that recipe?
15
grams.
Okay.
What's your process coming up with that recipe? Like, what made you end up with that ratio and those kind of 4 individual pours?
Yeah. So I tried lots and lots of different recipes. I started with that recipe, actually. That's the first thing I tried because that's normally how I brew coffee at home with other drippers as well. Usually for flat bottom drippers, I tend to do like a 4 equal pour kind of thing. I messed around with the dose to find like the ideal, from what I understand, the more coffee you put in, the more it's filtering the coffee because the coffee bed is acting as a filter as well. So I just tried to find the right dose where it tasted clean, but also it wasn't too much that it would be the water would fill up. And then the ratio was dependent on how the coffee tasted. So I tried 1:14, 1:15, 1:16, and I felt like the 1:16 was the best one for that coffee. Yeah. So that's pretty much it.
You make it sound easy, but complicated. I think one thing I really like in your description there, which I think is also something that we don't talk about enough, and it's like when we come to coffee brewing, I think there's as always we have a lot of assumptions about things, right? But what you mentioned now that the coffee bed is also filtrating the coffee, I think is really smart, and I think that's something that we see a lot of competitors are not taken into consideration. We talk a lot about bypass and so on, and the idea of grind size and so on, right? But it's not enough discussions about what's happening in that specific slurry, right? Because that actually makes a very big difference. One thing I want to touch on as well, and it's more of a video based. I don't remember exactly how long your total brew time was in that competition, which is silly because I have your score sheets laying around, so I should have looked at it. But in the video, you're about 3 to 3:30 or say, which is a little bit longer than, let's say, what, for example, I would brew personally. Not saying that you can't do, obviously you can do tasty coffee on a longer contact time. And I'm definitely not one of those that believe that you should brew fast. I don't roast fast, I don't brew fast. And tell me a little bit about what's your reasoning here, and maybe try to connect that, because I like what you say in the video where you're working with, let's say, a higher micron range above 700, but you're still able to get that kind of long contact time, and I think that's usually a very tasty combination.
Yeah, right. So what I've found is that particularly with the April dripper, when I do 4 pours, the last pour kind of takes long. So I tried different things where I was trying to cut it earlier or try to find a way to make it. I was trying different grind sizes to try to get in the 2 minute 30 second brew time, like the 2 minute 2 minute 30, like the usual window. Um, and I found that the 3 minute one actually tasted better, at least for my setup with the water I was using and the coffee. I also think it was because it was a washed coffee in the competition, so I wasn't really worried. I knew that those coffees kind of brew longer, and I just felt like it helped it have. I wasn't really thinking so much about the time. I was just trying to find what tasted good, and I think that gave it just enough like extra extraction, so that you got that clean coffee, but with still distinct taste notes.
I really like that. I like what you say about you weren't too worried about the, let's say, the numbers or the variables. You were trying to make tasty cup of coffee, and I think that's again what a lot of people are missing out on, because we're, both because of the competition cycle, but also because of the internet in general. We like to kind of box ourselves in a lot in terms of how we approach things, and especially when we get inspired by competitors. The way competitors brew is very specific to the coffees they are using, right? And in the competition now in Manila, our first coffee was a fairly light roasted, kind of high density, tiny screen size, very light, tiny screen size of an Ethiopian coffee, right? That was on top of that wash processed. And sure, it's definitely going to be a challenge, right? Which is, uh, yeah. I mean, I think the idea in general is that we want to have really tasty coffees within a range, because I do believe it's also more fun. But I think what I like and what we're going to continue with is the fact that we won't have any anaerobics. We're not going to have any infused coffees. We're going to keep it really, I don't want to say basic, because it makes these coffees sound boring, because usually they're tastier than all the other coffees. It was a tasty coffee, right? But I think it's smart there. You basically look at, okay, but what is the let's say natural flow rate of those beans, which it's gonna be slower. It's slower when you brew an April roasted washed Ethiopian as well, um, and then you adapt accordingly. And I think increasing the micron makes sense, to just kind of still have that clean. You mentioned the water you were using, and remind me again, what water did you use in that final stage of the competition?
Yeah, so there's this coffee shop that one of my favorite coffee shops here in Manila. I just asked if I could get some of their water. They're using.
That's how it was. Yeah, yeah, sure. Was that Deuces?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
actually
yeah, sure.
Juice's Alabang branch, their second branch. I
Ah, the second one. I haven't visited the small shop.
The small shop, the
Mhm.
water there tastes better for me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because I understand the competition water was also from Deuces.
Yeah. I mean, it's also BWT. Yes. So some. I'm not sure if they took it. Yeah, exactly. I think that's really smart. Like, I do want to touch on water a little bit, because water is very important, and I think water is very important, but it's important to the degree, and I think this is a reflection to national Brewers Cups, World Brewers Cup, whatever. It's very rare to me. There are exceptions, but it's very rare that people, also in Manila during the competition, that people that make their own water, as in taking some kind of demineralized or distilled water and putting their own kind of fusion of minerals into it, it's very rare that that makes a tasty cup of coffee, because you have issues with homogenization of the minerals in the water, and you have issues with the quality of the minerals you're putting in the water. So basically, water is a little bit complicated, and I don't think we always give it enough kind of attention. But my point here being that getting water from a reverse osmosis system or a proper water filtration is usually going to be the tastiest. As like a recommendation, just for anyone competing out there.
Mm.
I want to touch on two more things, or maybe three more things on the recipe before we go here. And so one thing you do with the kettle in the video now, which I think is quite interesting, is that you say you turn off the heating element. So basically you do that first pour, you put the kettle back, and then you just like, let's say, turn it off, which I guess would be similar to maybe just not putting it on, just kind of holding it. And you argue that the, let's say, increased decline of temperature that happens versus putting it on with the temperature on gives you a better aftertaste, right? Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on let's say how you came up with that? Was that a bunch of trial and error, or where did you how did you figure that out?
So I discovered that when a couple years ago I got a decent espresso machine, and one of the things that they tout about that is that it has like the most stable temperature or whatever. And something that I couldn't figure out for a couple months while I had the machine was why none of the coffees were tasting so good until I started declining the temperature. And then I realized that that was actually the key.
Sure.
So from that point onwards, even with my pour overs, I started not holding the temp. There was a time where I was brewing very differently, where I was brewing as fine as possible with the hottest water. And then I would try to keep the temperature as stable by even pouring a little bit of water so that the spout gets hot even before I do the first pour. Like I was really like concerned about that. But then when I figured that out, that like that's how I was reacting in espresso, at least with the decent machine. I tried doing it with filter coffee, and I noticed that the aftertaste, especially the cool down, was much better because I guess we were extracting less of the bad stuff. So
I think that makes so much sense, and it's especially espresso. I mean, just coming out of the world barista as well, as it's like lower temperature, and obviously exceptions, and some coffees are very different, and all of this for sure. But as a general rule, when it comes to espresso brewing, or let's say coffee brewing, lower temperatures to a degree is gonna allow you to brew better coffee. I think that's fairly accurate to say. That being said, the water temperature you're using in the video now is not very low, actually. It's around 94, which I consider to be a little bit of a higher, temperature. Have you played a lot with different temperatures on brewing as well? And why do you end up with 94 in the video? Was that what you used in the competition as well? Yeah.
So
yeah,
what's
yeah. Normally I start at around 94, and then I see if I want it cooler or hotter. I usually don't go below 90 because with at least the way that I brew, I don't find the tastiest cup with like the 85 degree kind of waters. So I kind of stick above 90 degrees. I find that has the most. So I think some people say that when you lower the temperature, you get less acidity, or sorry, you get more acidity. But what I find is that the hotter you go, the more acidic the brew becomes. At least that's from my experience. So that's kind of how I base it. If I want more of that like punch in terms of the acidity, I increase the temperature. But yeah, I guess the results may vary.
Yes, and I think they vary in. I mean, I think the science behind it is sugars easier to extract, higher temperature, more sugar, sweeter coffee, meaning lower temperature, more acidic because you have less sugar, so less sweet, right? But I think that's also, I would agree that there's absolutely no linear thought process there that makes sense. But I think that's the issue with coffee brewing in general, right? Where I think we like to have all of these like really well packaged ideas about how things works. We love linear scales where it's like, if I do this, it makes sense. I do a little bit more, then I get more of this. And I don't think that's how coffee brewing works. It's definitely not how coffee roasting works. So that's one of the reasons why I enjoy these competitions so much, because it's really about individualism in terms of finding that approach for that coffee, right? Super interesting, right? I want to, before we leave, I want to touch a little bit more on, let's say, the overall experience of the April Brewers Cup, and then obviously, what's going to happen now in your national competition. Are you gonna win? Which is maybe the wrong question to ask, but um, I think just in general, like, what's your, you have now, the competition's been a few weeks ago. You have a bit of time to reflect and think, and what was it worth doing, so to speak, right? And what are the main kind of, let's say, takeaways from that experience?
Yeah. Well, it was definitely, to answer your last question, it's definitely worth it. It was a incredible experience. Uh, that having this sort of this opportunity to actually brew for other people is something that I don't get to do because I don't work in a coffee shop anymore. So I just brew coffee for myself and for my dad. So getting to brew for other people is like a totally different task, and that was fun. And I really appreciated the feedback session that I think is really integral to this whole Brewers Cup that you organized. Um, it was it was just lots of fun and also lots of learning. I think my biggest takeaway was that there's a lot of work to do in, like, if you plan to join a competition, there's really a lot of work involved, and I guess to a certain degree luck, right? Because you never know what's going to happen, right? And you have to be prepared for anything. Uh, something that something that I realized as well was how important it was to kind of stay level-headed the whole time. So I was trying to find pockets during the competition while waiting for the next round to just like meditate and to breathe. Um, yeah, that really helped. And of course, you need a team. So I was really grateful for all the people that helped me. I didn't have all the equipment that I needed because I'm not a seasoned competitor, but I was hooked up with all the stuff that I needed, and turned out well. So I'm just really grateful. That's my like general feeling towards everything.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear, for sure. And it's I think it's first of all, it's also really cool where you come there and you don't have all the equipment, and you're obviously ending up with all the equipment, and then you're still winning, right? And I think that's for me, competitions is always this, the network and the people that help you, and you meet in these situations are, at least in my case, they're people that been with me for a long time now in various shapes and forms, because it is this community of like-minded people that um, are, they're into what you're into, which makes it kind of easier to connect, right? And I think it's also interesting what you say about maybe getting a better perspective on what it requires to actually do a competition like this. And I think that's I've been there myself from the perspective of, okay, I'm competing in my first national Brewers Cup. I have no understanding of what I'm doing about anything. Or I think I do. That's the issue, right? Because you go in going like, I know exactly how to do this. And then you have a judge sitting in the end of the day going, yeah, this wasn't very good. And then you go, why not? I thought I was amazing, right? So I usually call, or I refer to this competition as some kind of, it's better you fail here first than failing in your national, which is let's say a bigger commitment, more difficult task. But if anything, right, and I think this is very true also in your case, whereas I think at least I got the feeling during the feedback round that now you have a few key insights into the competition format. And we're talking about the basics, right? The importance of the pouring, how you deliver a taste descriptors, what to say and what not to say. So now you can kind of take that, package it whatever way you want to, and then kind of move into, bottom line, your first endeavor in your National Brewers Cup is now going to be better than what it was if you haven't joined a competition before, right? And I think that's super, super exciting, right? And then it'll also be fun to work together towards that national competition, right? So I'm very much looking forward to that, right? Because that is, for the people that don't know, that's part of the whole system here, right? And you as a winner don't have to, of course, compete in your National Brewers Cup if you don't want to. We're not going to force anyone. But the people that do want to take that opportunity kind of have my and April's full support in doing that, right? As in like supplying equipment and coffee and feedback on presentation and so on, right? So it's there for the people that kind of win, because we want to help you guys move forward, right? Like competing in the April Brewers Cup is fun. Competing on the World Brewers Cup stage is more fun. I would say in the kind of categories or hierarchy of coffee competitions, right? So we're really thankful, one, that you actually competed, and two, that we now get the opportunity to kind of be part of your journey towards the national competitions and hopefully one day that world championship as well. It's kind of a cool experience. Anything else you want to add? Maybe where can people find you if they want to follow you on social media or whatever? Any tips for the next competition? We have the Singapore edition coming up now of the competition. Like what should someone do to win this competition? They should make sure they have big cups so they don't underpour their coffee. That's why. So people don't know this, but Ben was actually very close to being disqualified. He wasn't, which was great. We did actually have to measure his cups to make sure, and yeah, someone had your back there because you were very, very close, but you still made it.
Yeah. You can follow me on Instagram. I believe it's at Bene.Sanchez. If you're competing in April Brewers Cup, well, what I did was I read the rules every day of both the April's rules and also the World Brewers Cup's new score sheet and the new rules. Just because I wanted to make sure that I had all the variables locked in. But even when I did that, there were still some things that I missed out. So I really think that it's important to read it and try to get familiar with it. Yeah, that's, I think, the best advice I can give.
Super, man. I appreciate that, and thank you very much for taking the time. And we're happy to see what will happen in the national competition as well, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Sweet.
Thank you to Benny for sharing his insight into this competition. The April Brewers Cup is here to stay, and we're about to launch several new competition dates. If you in any way, as a partner, a sponsor, a host, a competitor, wants to get in contact with us about the April Brewers Cup, you're more than welcome to visit our website. We have a link somewhere below. And as always, we want to thank you very much for watching, and have a good day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.